Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our next episode of Connections That Count. Today, we've got the honor and privilege of being able to interview Todd Colwell. He's got decades of experience working for Shell Oil Company and has recently been using that experience to help others through his consulting. So without further ado, we've got a great episode for you today. Please enjoy. Thanks. So thank you again, Todd, for joining us this morning. Really excited to have you on this next episode of Connections That Count, and obviously honored to get to take up some of your time. So thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and so I think we can just jump right in like all the other episodes. Really just interested in how you ended up getting into this industry and sort of the path that led you to your current role. So.
Okay. Well, my current role is retired and doing some consulting on the side. So I'll back up about 36-ish, 38 years and kind of give you a quick rundown of it all. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and we had a neighbor that worked for Shell Pipeline, actually. And he was always enamored with the job that he had, loved the company that he worked for. And I always wanted to work for a company that I could be as proud of as he always seemed to be. So during my college years, I worked as a temporary college laborer for Shell Pipeline, and then ultimately got a position working for them in the Chicago area. So after about a 35 to 36 year career with Shell, which spanned 16 different full-time roles, 7 different states, and a host, probably 13, 14 different managers, I ended up managing lubricants facilities towards the latter part of my career, and that's the position that I retired out of. But my passion during that whole time was, obviously learning the business. I worked for 4 different, we'll call them business units within Shell Pipeline, transportation, lubricants, and then a combination of systems, if you will, at one point. But my passion during that time was always developing people and processes. And that's where I seem to just really thrive and see the most success in helping a facility grow.
And, I think just digging straight into that, what about, making improvements to the processes or being able to, work on, help out your folks, what kind of drove your passion in that area?
Well, it's interesting because even though I worked for multiple different units within Shell, each one of them operated differently, but I saw a lot of common themes. And I think one of the biggest themes was there just seemed to be a lot of non-value added work being done in the organizations. And that was no fault of any individual, as it's just a function of, the big machine, if you will. So seeing that and seeing the impact that had on the individuals with, their ability to grow themselves, their ability to remain motivated because they're doing tasks that they really didn't understand why they were doing. They didn't see the value in it. And to be honest, in some cases, there wasn't any true value to it. It was just legacy kind of a process. So seeing that in the different units that I worked in and facilities that I managed, my mission, if you will, was to try to eliminate that non-value added work through doing, some of the CI purists will call it waste walks, right? Where you go and you identify different types of waste through the acronym TIMWOOD. But the core of that is talking to people, understanding what it is that they do day to day, and trying to identify where there are opportunities to improve and eliminate waste, if you will. And in this case, it's eliminate non-value added tasks that they're doing so that they can spend more quality time developing their skills in other pertinent areas and or their careers, right? So that was kind of the mission, if you will. And that evolved over my 30 years plus of leadership experience. At first it wasn't nearly as obvious to me what some of these things were, but as I grew as an individual and had good leaders helping me identify some of the non-value added activities that I was doing, I became better as a leader and helping others to do the same.
No, great. And, really just sort of in that same vein, I'm sure folks would wonder, let's say that maybe they're a little bit lower in the organization, or, in a similar leadership role, they've identified certain things that they think that they could make changes on to improve the company, improve the processes, improve the people. Um, how, how did what were some of the key factors that made you feel successful when you went to maybe upper leadership or somebody over you to make a change, right? What were some of the
Yeah.
key factors in allowing you to make those changes?
Well, I think, to answer the question, what were some of the key factors that made me feel as though that I was successful in it? It was truly the feedback from the individuals, right? So, it's one thing to get management approval to make a change, but at the end of the day, if the people that you're trying to help improve their role don't really feel the positive impact, that were you really successful? Probably not. So the real measure in my mind was when an individual came back and said, "This is so much better. Why haven't we been doing this the whole time?" The answer to that is good question, right? We don't know, but it's oftentimes we don't spend enough time to take a step back and look at a process and say, why are we doing this? Who is this really providing value to? And then once we understand that, streamlining it to where it can be done most efficiently, again, giving the individual more time to work on their core skills and or develop new. Sometimes throughout that journey, you find that the individual or even the organization doesn't have the core competencies to perform some of these tasks. So in a situation like that, it was incumbent upon me to try to find, okay, how can we most efficiently perform some of these tasks? And sometimes that means going outside the organization and identifying a subject matter expert, right? And that subject matter expert may be someone that you hire as a one-off to come and do something, train your people, and then you develop those skills internally. Or it may be somebody you retain for a period of time, just recognizing that if I bring that skill in-house, that's great because I've developed someone in-house, but you also kind of handcuff them to a role by doing that, depending on what those tasks are. If those tasks aren't something that they could use as we'll call it climb the ladder, then maybe you don't want to make them the primary focal point for that task, because then somewhere in time, a leader may say, well, gee, I don't want to lose this person because of that skill set that they have, right? So as most people in corporate America recognize, people don't stay in roles for more than 18 to 24 months, right? It's a constant rotation, and it's got its positives and negatives, right? It brings in a lot of new thought, but you also have a hard time retaining that institutional knowledge. So for me, looking at a process and identifying what were those core values and core competencies that we can routinely bring to the table, let's build that even deeper in-house. If it's a competency that we don't currently have, and based on the level of experience that's necessary to retain that, is it likely we're going to have a person in role for that length of time that's going to really add the value that the organization needs? So going back to your question, in those situations where I found myself having to go outside the organization to bring in a core competency, getting leadership to buy into that was always a struggle. Because at the end of the day, it's about money. It's about profitability, right? I mean, businesses aren't charities. They're there to make money, right? So if this, we'll call them a consultant, or if this particular outside SME is going to cost X dollars, it's where are we going to save money elsewhere? So for me, one of the things I had to do was help identify with the use of the team, where can we save the money that we're going to be spending on this process over here? How can we save that elsewise within the process, somewhere in the process, so that it's not an additional cost, it's a wash for money we're saving elsewhere, right? And that's sometimes difficult because that cost savings could be a cost avoidance, right?
Yep.
So it's that cost that you didn't spend because you did something better, which isn't in a lot of people's minds a real cost savings, but the reality is it is, because when that whatever happens, you're going to have to pay it, right? It may not have been in your budget, but you're going to have to pay it. So I'm not sure if I answered your question completely.
No, you absolutely did. No, you absolutely did. And really, it kind of just bled into our last little section here. You know, I think throughout this conversation, there's nuggets of advice. Maybe just to leave us off with a story that maybe stayed with you throughout your career, or you know, something you'd like to leave the folks with.
Well, with regards to people and processes, the one that stands out in my mind the most was earlier in my career when I was working with Shell Chemical, actually. We had a production process that we were developing, and this was a new process to our unit. It had been developed at the pilot plant, but we were scaling it for production volumes. And the cycle time, you know, beginning to end cycle time was about 36 hours on this process, which was just really excessive. We could not afford to continue to make this product with that cycle time. So I put together a team of operators who we had identified were very familiar with this process and were willing to try incremental changes to improve the process. So we commissioned this team. We worked together for several months. We were making small changes and, you know, seeing what the knockdown effect of those were. And we were having some progress, but nothing earth-shattering, right? So one day during one of our meetings, we were reviewing the output of the changes that we had made for this particular process. And I was literally going around the room talking to each operator on every single step of this 36-hour process. Now, granted, with it being 36 hours, not one single person was involved, right? So we had it aligned. We had a day shift and a night shift, rotating 12s, that we always had this core group of people involved in the entire process. So as we're going around the room and we're talking about these individual steps, I was getting really good feedback. And I got to this one individual who was giving kind of vague and generic feedback. So challenged it a little bit more, and come to find out, this individual had not implemented the changes that we had agreed to as a team, but rather liked doing it his way. And when he shared that, it was like an epiphany. We took a step back, and again, because it's a 36-hour process, every time he would do that, it wasn't always necessarily the very next batch. It was a batch that maybe happened 2 weeks later. So it wasn't very clear because it wasn't always happening on every single batch. It was happening kind of these outliers, but it was always happening when he was in control of a certain aspect of the process. But it was truly an epiphany. And it was at that moment I realized the true value of a process and the true value of the input of the team members, because had this individual not been honest about us challenging him on these, and these, you know, to the team, we had agreed to them, but they were pretty small steps, but it was having a huge impact. Anyway, to make the long story short, you know, we continued the process of implementing these changes, and we were able to reduce the cycle time from 36 hours down to 21 hours. So huge productivity increase, which improved our capacity to produce more of this product. And to this very day, though Shell doesn't own this facility anymore, that unit is producing those products at a much higher production rate because of that team's effort.
Right.
So, you know, just one example of many, but that's the one that had multiple players involved, multiple process steps, and the team review process of every step of the process. So to me, it's critical. You have to have the people that know the process to be a part of developing, if you will call written procedures for that process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, that almost makes too much sense, right? So,
you know, after it happened, we're like, this was so obvious, but none of us could figure out why we were having these unexpected results, we'll put it that way, when it wasn't happening all the time. So, but yeah, it is. Hindsight's 20/20.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
anyways, I just wanted to say again, your perspective is extremely valuable. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. We really appreciate it. And
Sure.
just for everybody watching, again, if you like the episode, if you can give us a like, give us a comment, any feedback, we'd appreciate. And I'll be tagging Mr. Todd in the post, so you'll be able to go see some of the stuff from him. So anyways, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day, man. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler. Take care.
Awesome.